Continuing to unpack boxes, Allison found the receipt for this cassock that I'm wearing. Realizing how much we spent on it several years ago, I said, boy, I don't wear that very much. So don't interpret any theology or philosophy based on the fact that I'm wearing a cassock as much as the fact that it's an expensive garment.
It's also warmer.
And it is warmer. Thank you. That's right. Let us pray. God and Father, you are so loving and gracious and good to us. You are the author of life. All things come about according to thy divine and holy will. Life and death and everlasting life. And so, Heavenly Father, we turn ourselves over to you and ask for wisdom as we look at the full scope of our lives. We ask that you bless us with insight and that we are given the great grace of preparation in this morning's sermon, this morning's talk, and in the series that we plan for all of Lent. Bless us not with a sense of hopelessness, but a sense of great hope, wonder, awe, and love. Fill us with thy peace through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen. So I have a lot to cover in a very short period of time. This is a presentation that I used to do when I worked for the inpatient hospice facility in Louisiana. And I've actually cut out a bunch of the slides. It's called Will You or Will You Not? An Introduction to Advanced Directives and Living Wills. And I want to start off. Do you know who this is? Anybody know who this is? You recognize this picture? Who is that? Is that Kelly? Are you raising your hand because you know who this is? Oh, Mark. Kelly's over there if you want to sit by her. I have a feeling you'll have lots to discuss by the end of this presentation, so you may want to be close. Do you know who this is? Anyone recognize this person? Yeah? Yes, Terry Schiavo. Very good, Michael Luciano. Terry Schiavo, if you remember, was in Florida, and she died 10 years ago this year. Is that hard to believe? So we want to look and say, what was her case about? But really, the better question is not what was her case about, but what was her case not about? Her case was not about what could or should be done for her care. Rather, it was about who gets to make decisions for her about the type of care that she is to receive. So her story, just briefly, she was 27 years old. 27. That's how young she was. She suffered a heart attack, they believe brought on by bulimia. She was in a coma for 2.5 months before being declared to be in a PVS, a persistent vegetative state, in which she remained for 15 years. She was not able to eat or drink anything on her own, and in 1998, 8 years after her heart attack, her husband Michael petitioned the court to have her feeding tube removed. Her parents objected, declaring that Terry was conscious. The debate, the courtroom proceedings, removal and reinsertion of her feeding tube, as well as the media frenzy took 7 years, from 98 to 2005, to play out. The critical piece for us to consider today is that Terry left no advanced directives. 27 years old, you wouldn't think that she would need advanced directives. But of course, we never know what could happen. Her situation was a heart attack. It could have easily have been a car accident or some other kind of tragic event in her life. But without an advance directive declaring who had the right to declare things for her on her behalf, or what it was that she would have wanted, it makes it very, very difficult. Ironically enough, her death was overshadowed only 2 days later by another death. And so the shift and the focus in the media shifted quickly from Terry Schiavo to, do you know who died in 2005? Pope John Paul II. That's right, Allison. That's right. What does our church teach? In the 67th General Convention in 1982, David, where was that in 82, you think? Do you know where that would have been? Anaheim, California. The Episcopal Church recognized and approved the living will as a beneficial document to be used by individuals throughout the church as a tool for discussing one's medical wishes before the time comes when one is not otherwise able to communicate these wishes. Then in 1991, the 70th Convention advanced written directives that make a person's wishes concerning the continuation or withholding or removing of life-sustaining systems should be encouraged, and this church's members are encouraged to execute such advance written directives during good health and competence, and that the execution of such advance written directives constitute loving and moral acts. Imagine that the document that you have in front of you, which is a legal written advance directive and living will, that could be constituted as a loving and moral act to write down while you are in good health and competence, so that your loved ones will know not only who is to make decisions, but what decisions to make for you. So what are the obstacles? Why is this so hard? First, we live in a death-denying society and culture. When I first put this program together about 4 or 5 years ago, I decided that I would call and talk to my parents about it and say, Mom, Dad, I'm about to give these presentations and invite people to write down what their wishes are. I don't know what your wishes are. That's the conversation I wanted to have. It took 3 phone calls and 1 face-to-face visit for me to garner the courage to finally say it. I would call and I would think, okay, this is the time I'm going to do it. And I'd get off the phone and I'd chicken out. Oh, I don't want to bring this up. And then finally, I was with my mom. We had lunch and we were saying goodbye, actually, and she was leaving. And I said, Mom, wait. There's one more thing. If you and Dad were to get ill or to die, what is it that you want? What are your wishes? And she looked at me and she says, what do you know that I don't know? It's a hard conversation to have. We have a discomfort with discussing death. So sometimes we try to make a joke about it. I like this cartoon that says, funeral directors say, I'll shop till you drop. Or this guy who made a coffin, made it look like a Pabst Blue Ribbon beer can. That seems a little irreverent, right? Yeah, let's laugh and joke about it. But it is a serious topic. So what do we need? If you learn nothing else this morning, I want you to take this away as the mantra of the morning. We need to discuss emotional issues during non-emotional times. We need to discuss emotional issues during non-emotional times. Because if we wait during emotional times, then we get filled with questioning ourselves and doubting ourselves, and our heart overtakes our head. We need to give death the same amount of time, effort, and energy in preparation that we do to births, weddings, or retirement. Do you know how many magazines, how many books are published on getting prepared for births, weddings, and retirement there are out there? That's a huge industry. And so many people, oh man, just imagine some of the young brides that we have out there. How much thought they put to every single detail. But when it comes to the certainty of that we all must face, which is death, we don't really want to talk about it or think about it. So, what do we need? We need an advance directive. And so the question is, what is an advance directive? There are 2 types. One is a living will. The living will outlines medical treatments that are acceptable and or unacceptable. The medical power of attorney is the second type of advance directive, and it designates someone in particular to make medical decisions for us. The living will answers the question of what is going to be done. The medical power of attorney answers who has the power to do it. Medical power of attorney ends at the time of death. Once a person has died, that medical power of attorney ceases. So it's a question of what and who. A good advance directive, like the one in front of you called 5 Wishes, that will have both. That's the one that I like to use and endorse. So what are the 5 wishes? It's written on the front of your cover. The person I want to make care decisions for me when I can't. The kind of medical treatment I want or don't want. How comfortable I want to be. How I want people to treat me. And what I want my loved ones to know. Now, this document is really pretty straightforward and clear. But I'm going to break down some of these sections and look at what the implications mean. So the first one, the person I want to make care decisions for me when I can. The law stipulates that decision-making power belongs to, first, the spouse. The spouse who is competent and able to make decisions for their partner, okay? So we know of situations that arise where one spouse is caring for another who may have dementia or Alzheimer's. And so if that person with dementia or Alzheimer's outlives or outlasts the person who is the caretaker, then we kind of run into some problems. Who comes after the spouse? Second would be children. Again, if the couple has no children, then that can become legally cumbersome and complicated. Third, their parents. If your parents are still alive. So first would be your spouse. Second would be your children. If you have no spouse that's able or no children that are able, then your parents legally would be the third in line to make decisions about you. Whether that's good or bad, I don't know. State appointed would be the fourth. And all of these are in the event that you have not stipulated someone. If you have not named someone for yourself, this is the order it goes in. Spouse, children, parent, then state appointed. So with an advance directive, only the person whom you have chosen can make decisions on your behalf. So the question then becomes, okay, so whom should I choose? Well, a spouse or a child may be too emotionally involved. However, sometimes they are the best choice. Only you know. You know your spouse, you know your kids, you know who would be in the best position to make decisions for you. Someone close by. You might want to choose someone close by. A child in Hawaii might not be the best choice if that person can't get here right away. If they live overseas or aren't accessible to you in a moment of crisis, because things can turn on a dime. That person must, of course, be over 18 years of age. So those are people, just some considerations of whom should I choose. The question then becomes, whom should I not choose? Well, you don't want your doctor. Your doctor should not be your healthcare provider. An employee or the spouse of your doctor or healthcare provider should not be your medical power of attorney. Someone serving as healthcare proxy for 10 or more people. So the person that kind of wants to be in charge of everybody's healthcare in the church or at the nursing home, it's a little dangerous when you start thinking about someone who has charge over the lives or the welfare of 10 or more people. I want my agent to be able to do the following. So once you figure out who it is that you want to have as a medical power of attorney, then you get into, okay, what are the kinds of things that medical power of attorney can or cannot do for me? Well, I want my agent to make choices for me about my medical care or services, like tests, medicines, or surgery. Again, you're in a position where you can't make decisions for yourself. Imagine yourself unconscious, if you will, or in a coma. They can make choices about starting, or if it's already started, stopping certain tests, medicines, or surgeries. They can interpret any instructions I've given. So a lot of time in hospice, we used to get someone who would say, well, Mom always said that she didn't want tubes. Well, the medical power of attorney could say, I know what she meant by tubes. She meant feeding tubes. She did not mean the nasal cannula with the oxygen. She wanted oxygen. She has COPD. Trust me, she wants oxygen. So the medical power of attorney, that agent, can interpret instructions that have been given. It's best if those instructions have been written down, of course. They can hire whichever health facility or program I might need, or discontinue any care provided by a health facility or program. They can make the decision to request, take away, or not give medical treatments, including providing artificial nutrition and hydration. And we're going to talk a little bit about artificial nutrition and hydration in just a moment. They're going to be able to see and approve release of my medical records and files, so that if you get transferred from one facility to another and you're still in a vegetative state and you can't speak for yourself, that person can authorize having medical documents sent from one facility to the next for your health care. They can also sign papers for you, as long as it pertains to your health care. They can move me to another state to get the care I need in order to carry out my wishes. So if you're the last person in Rapid City and your children, let's say, live on the East Coast, and you're not conscious and able to make the decision, they have the power to move you to a healthcare facility somewhere near them if that's what they decide on your behalf. They can authorize or refuse to authorize any medication or procedure needed to help with pain management. They can take legal action on my behalf to get the care that I need. What is this hint towards? What else can they decide for you? What's that? Funeral? No?
Your environment.
Your environment? They can decide to donate usable organs or tissues. Yes, so they can decide to donate usable organs or tissues. They can apply for Medicare, Medicaid, or other programs or insurance benefits for me. And they can see my personal files, like bank records, to find out what is needed for these forms. That doesn't mean they have access to your bank records. It doesn't mean that they can have... The medical power of attorney is not the same as power of attorney. That's not the person who has access to your checking account or checkbook. This is the person who can see the bank records to see, can mom or can dad afford the nursing home that I'm trying to put them in, based on what they get in monthly by income and what they have in their accounts. So remember, you can always change, delete, or add to any of the things mentioned, including who should serve as your healthcare proxy. So the things that we just discussed that your healthcare agent can do for you, you can say, no, I don't want my healthcare agent to see my bank records. I don't want my healthcare agent to make a decision about whether or not I can move to the East Coast. So you can not only choose who you want to make decisions for you, but you can limit or empower the person with the types and levels of decisions that they're capable of making on your behalf. Then we get into the kind of medical treatments I want or I don't want. So we've already answered now, who is the person that is going to be making decisions for me and what kind of decisions can they make. Now we want to look at an overview of the options and the moral implications of each of those options. And there are really three primary types of treatments that we want to be concerned about when we're talking about an advanced directive. The first is CPR. The second is artificial nutrition and hydration. And the third is ventilators or respirators. Am I going to want CPR? If I'm at home or I'm shoveling the walk, do I want CPR? Do I want artificial nutrition and hydration? And do I want to be put on a ventilator? CPR. Let's take a look at what CPR entails and what it means. There was a CPR training class here yesterday. Who went to that? Who did CPR? 1, 2, 3, 4? Yeah, so 4 out of the 10 people that were part of that class. So it was developed in the 1960s, and it's used when a person's heart or breathing stops. And it was originally intended for use where death was accidental, drowning, car accident, or when someone was having a heart attack. According to the Journal of the American Medical Association in 1974, it says CPR is not indicated in certain situations, such as cases of terminal or irreversible illness, when death is not unexpected. Resuscitation in these circumstances may represent a positive violation of a person's right to die with dignity. In other words, if someone has cancer, if someone is terminally ill and has a serious disease, you're really going to want to determine whether or not you want to be a DNR, a do not resuscitate, so that you don't have to undergo... I mean, if a person's dying of cancer and we start doing CPR on them, to what end? What are we trying to accomplish? What are we trying to do in that situation? Here's a good question. What is the survival rate of CPR recipients in the hospital? So the question is about people that are in the hospital with medical staff who are trained in CPR and have all the equipment around them. The survival rate of CPR recipients in the hospital is what? 74, 51, 15, or 89%? 15.2% if you're in the hospital and get CPR. If the patient has multiple medical problems, has a terminal illness, or cannot live independently, that survival rate then becomes 2%. Okay? So the question of whether or not I want CPR, based on where I am at different places in my life, is very important. If I'm driving down the street and get in a car accident, go ahead and please do CPR on me. Go ahead and resuscitate me and let's keep me going. If, however, I'm battling cancer, I'm weakened, and the prognosis is not good, and there's really not much of a chance of recovery, then there's not going to be any desire on my part to have CPR. Now, if you're in a hospice facility, they will not do CPR. CPR, a DNR, a do not resuscitate order, is required to be part of a hospice program. There are risks associated with CPR. So if you're frail, your ribs could be broken and a lung or spleen could be punctured because of the necessary force applied during CPR. Yesterday, when you guys did the CPR class, was there a lot of force that you had to push down on? Yeah. So you can probably see how it could injure somebody who's really frail and not in good shape, right? If too much time has elapsed and the patient has not had oxygen for a while, there could be brain damage. This is what happened with Terry Schiavo. Because of the chain of events put into motion by CPR, a person could be placed on a breathing machine even though he or she might not have wanted it. So the story that I tell in relation to this, there was a man back in Louisiana that I knew of. He was terminally ill. His wife was his full-time caretaker. His wife had the neighbor lady come and sit with her husband while the wife took an hour to go get her hair done. It was the one treat that she allowed herself every week. This particular week, while she was getting her hair done, her husband had a cardiac event. He was already terminal. He was already dying. The neighbor lady that was watching him and staying with him panicked, called 911. The 911, the EMS crew came in. They started CPR. The wife comes home from the beauty shop, discovers all this and says, no, he's got a DNR. They had already started CPR. He ended up having to go into the hospital and getting treatment. He did eventually die later, but it caused a certain chain of events that in the moment could not be stopped. So it's important to know that CPR is the standard order for nursing homes and hospitals. So if you have a loved one, if you yourself are in a nursing home eventually, or if you have a loved one in the nursing home and they have a cardiac event, the standard order for nursing homes is to have CPR performed, unless that patient has a DNR, a do not resuscitate order. And as I said before, hospice stays usually requires a do not resuscitate order. There's no CPR, no extraordinary measures will be taken. All right, so that's CPR. Any questions about that before I move on? Comments? Artificial nutrition and hydration. This is a really important one. This is one that we often run into lots of questions, a lot of struggle with guilty feelings and thoughts and uncertain of what to do. So I just want to kind of go over a little bit about what artificial nutrition and hydration includes. And it includes feeding tubes and IV fluids. So there are a couple of different kinds of feeding tubes. The first is the NG tube, the nasogastric tube, which is inserted through the nose, down the esophagus, and into the stomach. And they take the little, like the Ensure type thing, and put that directly into the person's stomach that way. This is usually a very temporary thing. If an NG tube is maybe not the most comfortable thing in the world, but it is the most efficient and easiest way to get in and to get out. And again, it's not something that's to last permanently. Then you have a PEG tube, which is inserted surgically through the skin and into the stomach wall. And if you've ever seen anybody with that, the tube just comes right out. Again, they pour the Ensure directly into, I call it Ensure, but it's not Ensure, it's a different substance. So if you have a PEG tube, don't be pouring Ensure in there. But that's how it's designed. That is for longer lasting, people with that can have some quality of life perhaps, but are not able to swallow. Perhaps they're paralyzed or something like that, and they need to get nutrition in. The TPN is less common. It's a catheter or needle that's inserted into a vein, often in the chest, and a liquid containing nutrients is pumped directly into the bloodstream, bypassing the digestive system completely. This is an extreme method and usually is not considered to be a long-term solution. It's important to know that most patients with a life-threatening illness or long-term chronic illness never regains the ability to eat or drink. Now I'm talking about people that have moved into end-of-life care, people probably who are in hospice that are moving towards the end of their lives. These are people with life-threatening or long-term chronic illnesses. Even within the last few months of life, eating habits change. Cravings come and go. What is needed is not the energy that comes from food, rather it is spiritual energy that is needed. Of course, with everything, there are risks, as there are with artificial nutrition and hydration. There's the risk of aspiration, pneumonia from vomit that gets into the lungs because the person's not able to swallow properly any longer. Ulcers and subsequent infections can occur. The hands of the body might have to be tied down if the patient tries to remove tubes or fights the tubes that are in. And what happens then is that immobility leads to bed sores and stiffening of limbs due to a lack of movement. Patients can lose some personal interactions. They are no longer fed 3 times a day. And so those are the risks of artificial nutrition. When we get into IV fluids, an IV line, that's not as critical or problematic as the feeding tube, but it's through a needle or a plastic tube, a catheter in the arm, a patient can receive fluids and medications. IVs obviously are very common. IVs are very important. The point of insertion needs to be changed regularly to prevent infections, and the hands might have to be tied down if the patient pulls or tugs at them. These are some of the risks of IV fluids. Medical evidence suggests that dehydration in the end stage of a terminal illness is actually a very natural and compassionate way to die. There are benefits, and I'm going to talk about why that makes sense by explaining the benefits to not using artificial nutrition and hydration. Again, I'm dealing with a terminal, chronically ill patient. This isn't someone who has been in a car accident and has the hope or the chance of recovery. I'm only addressing a person who, number one, doesn't have the capacity to make decisions for themselves, and second, is terminally ill and is nearing the end of their life. Less fluid in the lungs makes breathing easier. Less fluid in the throat means less need for suctioning. Less fluid means less swelling or pressure around tumors and therefore less pain. Because what happens is, as the body begins to die and the organs begin to shut down, if we start pumping more and more fluids in and they're not evacuating those fluids, they just start to swell up and they start to build up, and it can cause great pain and discomfort. There's less urination if you don't use artificial nutrition or hydration. There's less urination, therefore less need to move patient for bed changing and less risk of bed sores from sitting on wet sheets. Again, we're talking about chronically, terminally ill patients. A natural release of pain-relieving chemicals as the body dehydrates. The withdrawal of tubes is a much more difficult decision than placing one in the first place. Once you get the tubes put in, the decision to remove the tubes is so much harder than the original decision of putting them in. As the body shuts down, the digestive system is not able to process or absorb nutrients in the way that a healthy body does. And the cessation of eating and drinking is simply a natural part of the dying process. What is the Episcopal Church's position? Well, the Church does not teach that all dying patients require feeding tubes or IV fluids. In the 70th General Convention in 91, it says, although human life is sacred, death is part of the earthly life cycle. There is a time to be born and a time to die. There is no moral obligation to prolong the act of dying by extraordinary means and at all costs if such dying person is ill and has no reasonable expectation of recovery. In those cases involving persons who are in a comatose state from which there is no reasonable expectation of recovery, this church's members are urged to seek the advice and counsel of members of the church community, clergy, friends who are well versed in the teachings of the Scriptures and in our tradition, its sacramental life, and contemplating the withholding or removing of life-sustaining systems, including nutrition and hydration. We must recognize, it says later in the year 2000, we must recognize that having a synthetic protein compound pumped directly into the intestine by skilled medical personnel is not the same as eating and drinking with friends. It is a qualitatively different act from feeding a patient with a cup and a spoon. So when we talk about artificial nutrition and hydration, we are not starving people to death. We are not causing them to die because we refuse to give them something to eat or drink. We are allowing the natural dying process to take place. in its own due course. Any questions about artificial nutrition or hydration? Any comments? Any thoughts? Okay. Uplifting stuff, eh?
Yes.
Ventilators. And these are the kinds of things that you're going to want to put in this book about, and this book is really well suited because it talks about different parts of your life. If I'm in this condition, I want this to happen. If I'm in that condition, I want this to happen. So it's very helpful. So whether or not we want to be put on a ventilator aids a patient with breathing. It's a machine that's connected to a tube, which is inserted through the mouth and down the windpipe, allowing the machine to force air into the lungs. A tracheotomy is surgically connected through the throat directly into the windpipe. A ventilator generally is to be a temporary thing. A trach, obviously, because it's surgically implanted or surgically done, is a more permanent thing. Now, there are some alternatives to ventilators, again, dealing only with terminally ill people who are in the dying process. Alternatives include oxygen masks, pressurized face masks, there's a special vest they can use, and there are medications which can help with labored breathing. There are risks with a ventilator. There can be a leak of air from the lung into the chest cavity. Pneumonia can happen from bacteria in the tubing. Immobility can lead to psychosis, skin breakdown, and progressive weakness. And the tube in the trachea can cause erosion of the trachea. So we must remember that if someone dies after the removal of a ventilator, that the death results from the disease, from the chronic terminal illness, and not from turning the machine off. I've had so many folks who have been wrestling with guilt for years because their loved one was on a ventilator. They felt like they were talked into turning it off by the doctor, and they turned it off, and their loved one died, and they felt like they had killed their loved ones. That is not the case. If someone dies after removal of a ventilator, the death results from the disease, not because we turned off a ventilating machine. We are allowing death to occur naturally, which would have happened earlier if the machine had never been started. The thing that we want to look at and evaluate as we look at all those different options in the book and with all of the different things that we discussed this morning is, how do I want to die? Do I want to die peacefully and naturally, or do I want all measures, all the time, in all situations? Probably not. Remember, one of the first slides that I showed you, we said we want to make emotional decisions during non-emotional times. So, if we're not suffering with a chronic or debilitating or terminal illness at this time, now is the time to say, this is how I think I would want to die if I were to have a chronic or terminal illness. Rather than not talking about it, not addressing it, and leaving it to our kids, our spouse. I mean, they're going to have enough on their plates emotionally to deal with, right? And so we want to try to make it easy for them. As the General Convention statement alluded to, it is a moral and loving act when we fill out a document like this and say, this is what I want. This is what I mean. When I say I don't want tubes, what does that mean? Again, I use the example. If I'm in a car accident and I have the chance of recovery, go ahead and hook me up to some tubes. But if I have a chronic illness and the doctor says I'm on my way out, then maybe I don't want tubes. I can just tell you that one of the things in my 5 wishes that I put is either in the hospital or in hospice, I don't want the TV on. It used to drive me crazy when the nurses would go in there and they put on some soap opera or some loud Charles Bronson movie or something. I don't want that to be the last thing I hear. Now, if somebody wants to hire a harpist to come in and play the harp, maybe a harpist would confuse me and I wouldn't know which way to go. So maybe I won't go this. Once this thing gets filled out, and we're gonna open the floor to some conversation and questions here in a minute. Once we get this thing filled out, now what? Well, first, keep the original in a secure but accessible place and let other people know where it is. Hey, I've got my wishes. It's in the kitchen in the junk drawer somewhere that you can have it, but where if you're incapacitated, people can find it. So that means don't put it in a safety deposit box, which might be difficult to access by others, especially if they don't have the key. Especially if you've said, no, you're not allowed to go into my safety deposit box. Give photocopies of this document to your agent. So that's the other thing is, if you say, I've got 5 children and I want this child to be my medical power of attorney, let that child and all the other children know. I know you don't want to start a fight. I know that you feel like, oh, but I'm picking one over the others and I'd rather them deal with it when I'm comatose. But it's important that you let them know in advance. I thought it was funny. Give photocopies to that agent, to an alternate agent. You can identify alternate agents also. Give a copy to your doctors, all of them. Give them to your family, to your close friends, anybody who wants one. Give them to me. I'll put them on file for you. And so if you're ever in the hospital and the family says, well, we don't know what mom or dad wanted. You know, I do. I got a copy of it on file. We'll keep it on file in the church. Give it to the guy at the donut shop. I don't care. Give it to everybody. It'd be a little weird to give it to the guy at the donut shop. Talk about your wishes with loved ones. Try to overcome that awkward fear that we have about talking about the end stages of our life. I don't know, I left this in here. In Louisiana, we were able to register these with the Secretary of State's office. Can you do that in South Dakota? Is that an option here? No? Okay. Yes, ma'am.
But you can put it on file with medical records at the hospital. So if you live here and you're going to end up in that emergency room, you don't have to be a patient there to have that file.
Oh, that'd be great. And that's a good thought, because even though you may say, I don't want to go to this particular hospital, something could happen and you don't have a choice. That's the hospital you go to. So at Rapid City Regional, you can put it on file there at the Rapid City Regional Hospital. So the obstacles, we're just not comfortable with talking about serious illness or death. The vagueness of language does not guide treatment. What do you mean when you say, I don't want to be connected to machines? What do you mean when you say, I don't want tubes? You know, what do you mean when you say, I have a DNR, a do not resuscitate order? You know, if I'm terminally ill, I plan to have a DNR. But if I'm just going to the dentist, I'm not sure that giving a copy of the DNR to the dentist is necessary, right? That's a joke between me and Allison. That's a little dentist. The proxy, and another obstacle is the proxy fails to track changing feelings of the patient. Remember, we're making emotional decisions during non-emotional times. We're in good health. We can think clearly right now. But if things progress and change and we say right now, yeah, I would be okay with artificial nutrition and hydration. I think that would be appropriate for me. But my health deteriorates and I have a different diagnosis, I'm in a different frame of mind, and I've changed my mind. We need to make sure that the healthcare proxy, the medical power of attorney, keeps track of our changing thoughts and feelings. Because we have had in hospice, we have had folks who, you've got the mom that's in the hospice facility. You've got the daughter that has been living with the mom for the past 5 years. And then you've got the son in California that flies in at the last minute and goes, stop! Mom always said she wanted everything to be done. Well, yeah, that was when Mom was 40 years old. Mom's now 88 years old and has cancer and tuberculosis and Ebola. Right? Mom's in bad shape. I can assure you, Mama changed her mind. But the son, the brother, out in California, it's always the ones from California that come in and screw it up. Oh, why it's California? Doctors don't bring it up and don't like to give bad news. There is a fascinating frontline documentary that took place a couple of weeks ago. It's by a doctor who's written a book that talks about our mortality. I haven't read the book. My spiritual director is reading the book, and she says it's fantastic. You can go to pbs.org, PBS, like the channel, And you can find online the recent Frontline documentary. I highly recommend that you watch it. Allison and I stumbled upon it, and it's fascinating. And he talks about doctors and their perspective on how they are uncomfortable at times, kind of giving bad news and feeling like they're robbing people of hope. One of the doctors that's in this documentary, she is a neuro-oncologist, which means she specializes in brain cancer. The rate of people who live 5 years or greater, of the patients, all the patients that she sees, the percentage of people who live 5 years or beyond is only 5%. So 95% of her patients dies. And yet, when she sits with them, she has a really difficult time kind of saying that and dealing with the reality of what they're facing. And so, doctors don't bring it up and they don't like to give bad news. They're human too. Doctors have feelings. Doctors don't want to look us in the eye and say that things are looking very glim. And so, that can be an obstacle to some of this as well. No one wants to be perceived as giving up hope. Oh my gosh, if for every person who came through the hospice door that said, oh, we hate to... Oh, I'll tell you a story, okay? So, this is actually kind of funny. We had an elderly lady that came in. And I walk in, hi, I'm the chaplain, my name is Chris Roussel. And the daughter, I said, would you like me to pray with you all? And the daughter, the adult daughter, is standing at the bedside. The patient was probably 85 to 90 years old. The daughter was probably in her mid to late 50s. And I said, would you like to pray together? And the daughter goes, and I said, what's the matter? And she kind of leads me out to the hallway. She says, listen, Mom does not know that she's in a hospice facility. Mom does not know that she's dying, and we don't want to tell her. And I said, well, ma'am, with all due respect, your mother as the patient has the right to know where she is and what's going on. Not to mention, she has a right to be able to tie up loose ends and to say the things that she needs to say at the end of her life. And the daughter was adamant. Absolutely do not tell my mother she's in a hospice and that she's dying. I do not want her to know that. Okay, well, we'll try to work around that. So later that afternoon, the daughter had left to go somewhere, and the mom is in the hospital room by herself, in the hospice room by herself, and she waves me in. And I walked in, and she says, where am I? I said, oh. Okay, well, I said, you're in a hospice facility. She said, well, that's what I thought. She said, listen, can you do me a favor? My daughter doesn't know this is a hospice facility, and she doesn't know that I'm dying. But I'm really ready to go, and I don't want to upset her. Wow! Wow. Patients have an idea of what's going on with them. They're usually not the ones in denial. Usually. Family strains keep us from talking about difficult subjects. And then finally, procrastination. Well, I'll get to it. I'm 44 years old. I'm in pretty good health. I've got time for this kind of thing. Go back to Terry Chabot that we showed at the beginning. She was 27 years old. We never know what might or could happen. And so dealing with these things today, now, is of vital importance. So the final question that I have for this presentation is, will you or will you not? Ta-da! We have about 10 minutes. Questions, comments, thoughts, anything? I know we have a doctor in the house, so I hope I didn't lead anyone astray, Chris. Yes, Allison?
Is a medical proxy and a medical power of attorney, is that interchangeable terms?
I think so, yeah. Medical proxy and medical power of attorney would be one and the same thing. But as I had mentioned before, medical power of attorney and a power of attorney that is over people's finances are not the same thing.
So they could be two different people?
They could be two different people. They could be the same person, but they could also be two different people. Probably ought to be two different people. I don't think I would want the person that's over my finances over my healthcare decisions.
Tell me more about that.
Without this document, you automatically come first. The spouse is first. But But suppose, God forbid, something happened to the two of us simultaneously. And then we both survived, but we're in a coma, both of us. You know? Well, Caroline and Meredith aren't able to make decisions because they're not 18 yet. And your parents and my parents are alive, so our parents would make a decision. So, yeah. I'm sorry, Keith?
You know, doctors are great people. And I
Generally speaking, yes.
Like doctors. But I had an experience where a doctor made it very difficult. Because it was when my sister was terminally ill. And we were discussing, you know, the fact that she did not have a advanced directive.
Right.
And she had told me that she didn't want any extraordinary measures taken to keep her alive.
Right.
And I was discussing this with her doctor, and the doctor said, well, 2 months ago she asked me, am I dying? And I told her, not if I can help it. And then, a little further in the discussion, she said, well, I'm going to do everything I can to keep her alive.
Wow.
And I specifically asked, does she have any chance of ever getting out of this hospital? And the doctor told me, he said, well, probably not. And at that point, my sister was already probably beyond making a clear decision.
Right.
And we had some difficult times. It just made a hard situation for us.
It makes it harder, and it can prolong the dying process unnecessarily at times. Yeah. Yeah, Kay?
I came in very late, so maybe this has been discussed. But one of the things, my mother has a durable power of attorney and a medical directive that are together, and I'm the person. My brother and I are the ones who oversee this. And her doctor said to me when we did this, she said, you know that this only works if they're in hospital, because it has a do not resuscitate order on it. And I said, well, no, it's there. And she said, well, if you call them, if something happens and the emergency team is called to come and see her, they aren't going to check any records or anything to see if there's a directive. They're going to resuscitate her, and you need to be aware of that.
Right. We talked a bit about that. We sure did.
Medical alert bracelets too.
Oh yeah, medical alert bracelets. So Chris, if the medical team arrives and there is a DNR, and the person has that on a medical bracelet, they'll just make the patient comfortable, right?
Sure, unless there's some reason to doubt what they're saying.
Can I do a PS on that?
Yeah, go ahead.
In South Dakota, in 2004, we passed a Comfort One legislation. So it can't just be a medical alert bracelet that you buy at the drugstore. It has to be a doctor's order, and you order it from the State Department of Health. It's $35 for the bracelet, but that would alert the emergency medical personnel not to start compressions. And so I understand, I think, what the doctor might have been saying to her, but the magic would be kind of what happens to initiate that 911 call.
Right.
And so for somebody who maybe has a real reason where they might be out at the mall but don't want compression started, that Comfort One bracelet's a great option.
Did everybody hear that? Did everybody hear that? Would you come back up here with your microphone and because I think that's really important, since that's something I'm not familiar with and it's local. And tell me your name.
Can I introduce you? Yeah.
Please.
I'm Barbara Vargo, and I'm kind of intimidated right now because I'm your speaker next week, and I just came on a recon visit.
Yay!
But I'll bring some information about Comfort One next week when we talk about hospice, and it is unique to South Dakota and 12 other states. And so it's something that our legislature passed in 2004 that would give people the option to have a bracelet that they could wear out in the community that just indicated to emergency personnel, please don't start compressions, I am on comfort measures only.
Yeah, thank you. And tell me your first name again?
Barbara.
Barbara.
Yeah.
Barbara will be here next week about between 9 and 9:15, depending on how long I preach, again, to talk about hospice care and about when is the appropriate time to enter into hospice? That's always a tough question for families who aren't familiar with that process and with hospice. So I'm looking forward to it. I can't wait to have you here. Thank you, Barbara. Yes, Joanne?
I'm saying you need to have DNR specifically in print. If you don't, they'll do compressions.
That's right. You have to have DNR specifically in print, but
You can have all this other information and everybody knows it, but if you don't have DNR,
that's right. You have to have that in print. And Kay's point is quite valid. You know, in the nursing home with your mom having a DNR, they should be aware of that and should not start compressions. But as Barbara had pointed out, if Kay and her mom are out, if your mom's riding an elephant, right, Kay? Kay's mom rode an elephant a few years ago, for those of you who don't know. But if Kay's mom is out riding on an elephant and she has an episode and there are people around, and let's say Kay is not there to inform them, but she's just with the group from West Hills, well, who knows what could get started. But this bracelet that Barbara's talking about could be invaluable for something like that. Yes, Canon Seeger.
Well, we're mobile people. That's fine as long as you're in Rapid City, South Dakota. But if you're at home and the incident occurs, then what do you do? How do you ensure that you're going to have exactly what you want?
That's a little more complicated. If you are traveling, you know, God loved Jackson Hammett. We know that he was traveling when he passed away. You know, it's really it is very ironic that Steve Branch and I decided to put these series of presentations together to come face to face with the practical realities of our own mortality before Jackson's passing. But Jackson's unfortunate circumstance has served as a reminder to us all that we need to get our affairs in order and we need to be prepared for whatever might happen. We cannot prevent all possibilities from going against our wishes, David, but at least having a document like this is a first start. But it's a great thought. Why not bring it with you when you're traveling? I don't know, get a tattoo that says DNR.
There are new technologies out there for medical alert bracelets where you're actually able to, it's basically a link to a website. So you can update your
Wishes?
documents, your wishes, you have medication lists, everything that can be accessed, you know, from anywhere, you know, worldwide.
So Joseph is saying that there are these bracelets with chips in them now.
Yep.
That they can scan wherever you are, and it'll get it to a website, and your wishes will be listed there.
And you have control over it.
I think that's going to be coming in smartphones too.
Smartphones too? Wow, that's fascinating. That's fascinating. I mean, I just found out you can buy movie tickets with your smartphone. I mean, you think that you can have a DNR on your smartphone. I'm going to go get ready for our service. Yes, Elizabeth?
Well, I just wanted to, so I might be repeating things, but part of the issue is that the people who come are trained and their mindset is save the person, save
That's
the person.
right.
And even the idea of checking your cell phone is a little bit, I don't know if they would take time to check.
Perhaps we will get there. And we did. We talked a little bit about that too. That once you get those wheels set in motion with an emergency group, you can't stop them. So and that is their mindset, is to save and to rescue. So the bottom line is, let's get our stuff filled out, let's put it on file, and let's come next week and find out when is it appropriate to enter into hospice, and what is hospice? What does it mean? Thank you so much. God bless you. Thanks, Joseph.
Yeah.
I don't know if I accidentally called you.